The fastest way to tell if a garden bed is going to stay clean is not the flowers. It is the dirt. If you can see bare dirt between plants, weeds are already on the way. That is why so many people feel like they are weeding forever. You pull today, you blink, and it is back. So here is the question that sounds almost unfair. What if one cheap fabric layer, hidden under mulch, could cut your weeding down for months with one setup? If you have ever walked past a brand new hotel, a neat shopping center, or a freshly landscaped office, you may have noticed something. Those beds look clean for a long time. Not perfect forever, but clean enough that it feels like magic. They are not out there hand-pulling every weed every morning. Most of the time, they are using a simple barrier under mulch to block light. It is not fancy. It is not a secret chemical. It is just a light-blocking layer, placed once, then covered. But if it works, why do regular home gardeners still spend weekends on their knees, yanking weeds until their fingers ache? And why do some people try fabric once and swear they will never touch it again? Here is the twist. The method works, but only when you use the right kind of fabric and install it like you actually want it to last. Most fabric fails are not fabric fails. They are install fails. So before we get into the setup, let's talk about what weeds really need, because this makes the whole method feel obvious. Weeds need light. They need a little space. They need a chance to root. When you pull weeds from the top, you are fighting the last step of the problem. The seeds are still there. The roots of tough weeds are still there. And every time the sun hits open soil, more seeds wake up like little alarm clocks. Now picture the same bed, but with a light-blocking layer covering the soil. Not plastic, not a shiny sheet. A breathable fabric that lets rain and water pass through, but blocks most light from reaching the soil. Then you put mulch on top. The fabric blocks light from below, and the mulch blocks light from above. Weeds under the fabric stay weak because they cannot get light. Weeds that start on top usually root in the mulch, not deep in your soil, which means they pull out easily. That is the big idea. You are not trying to win a never-ending weed battle. You are changing the rules so weeds do not get the easy win. And here is the simple line to remember, because this is the rule that makes the system work. Fabric blocks light. Mulch protects fabric. If you remember that one sentence, you will avoid most mistakes people make. Now let's talk about the biggest mistake, the one that makes people hate this method. They use plastic and call it fabric. Plastic does block light, yes, but it also blocks water and air. Rain runs off. Water from your hose pools and slides away. The soil underneath can turn weird, either too dry in spots or too wet in spots. Then mulch can drift. Plants can struggle. And when a weed finally finds a tiny opening, it grows strong because it has warm, protected space to spread under the plastic. That is not the method you want. That is the method that creates rage. The fabric you want is breathable. It should feel like a woven cloth, like a tight basket weave. Water should pass through it. Air should still move. The goal is not to seal the earth. The goal is to block sunlight from hitting the soil. When you use breathable woven landscape fabric under mulch, you get the blocking power without turning the bed into a trapped, soggy mess. Now here is the second mistake, and this is why people think cheap fabric always fails. Some very cheap rolls are thin felt that tears fast. It looks like cloth, but it stretches, rips, and breaks down quickly. Then weeds punch through it like it is paper. People remove it in frustration, and they tell everyone fabric is useless. What they really tried was flimsy felt that was never built for real garden beds. So here is the honest promise. If you choose breathable woven fabric and lay it correctly under mulch, you can reduce weeding a lot for months in the right spots. It will not create a magic force field that stops every seed from falling, but it can stop the deep, ugly weed jungle that steals your time. It can turn weeding into quick, easy pulls instead of a weekly battle. Now let's talk about where this method shines, because this is part of why people get mixed results. This works best in stable areas, flower beds with shrubs and perennials, strips along fences, beds along walkways, around mailboxes, under wood chip paths, under decorative mulch where you want a clean look. It is not the best fit for a bed you dig up often, like a vegetable bed where you plant new seeds all over, mix compost deep, and change rows every month. In those beds, you usually want full soil access, not a layer you have to cut around. That right there is a reason the method feels hidden. People try it in the wrong place, get annoyed, and swear off the whole idea. But used in the right places, it can feel like you bought back your weekends. Now let me show you the exact install, but in a way that keeps it simple. This is not a 20-step project. It is a light-blocking blanket with a protective cover. The details that matter are the same details that make the competitor videos feel true. Seams, edges, holes. Those are the weak points weeds use like doors. Start by clearing what is already there. You do not need to dig the bed like you are starting a new farm. You just need the surface reasonably clean and flat. Pull big weeds. Cut tough weeds at the base and remove them. If the bed is tall and wild, cut it down first so you are not trapping a thick jungle under your fabric. The goal is not perfect. The goal is no big weeds sticking up that will lift the fabric. Now do a small step that feels boring but helps the final result. Lightly water the soil before you cover it, not a flood. Just enough to settle dust and soften the top. Slightly moist soil lies flatter under fabric and is less likely to shift into little gaps. It also helps any weeds you missed struggle faster once they lose light. Now lay the fabric like a blanket. Do not stretch it tight like a drum. Lay it flat and calm. Use pieces that fit the bed shape. Most beds are not perfect rectangles, so do not fight that. The real secret is overlap. Overlap every seam. Weeds love seams more than any other spot. If you lay two fabric edges touching like a straight line with no overlap, that seam becomes a runway for weeds. A good overlap is at least the width of your hand, and more is even better if you have enough fabric. Think of it like shingles on a roof. You do not want water and light sneaking through cracks. Overlap turns a crack into a blocked zone. Now pin it down. This step is where many installs fail. People lay fabric, toss mulch, and walk away. Then wind lifts an edge, rain shifts mulch, the fabric wrinkles, gaps appear, and weeds move in. Use landscape staples or pins to hold the fabric flat. Place pins along edges and seams, and add a few in the middle so the fabric hugs the soil instead of floating above it. Now let's talk about the spots around plants, because this is the part that decides if your bed stays clean or becomes annoying. If you already have shrubs or flowers, you cut around them. Make a small slit or an X, and slide the fabric around the plant base. Do not cut a huge donut hole. Huge holes create rings of exposed soil. Exposed soil gets sun. Sun wakes up weeds. Small, neat openings keep the barrier doing its job. Also, do not choke plants. Around shrubs and trees, you want space at the base. You do not want fabric pressed tight against a trunk. Plants need air around their base, and you do not want to trap moisture right against wood. So you keep the opening neat but not tight like a zip tie. If you are planting new shrubs or perennials, you can lay the fabric first, then cut holes where you will plant. Keep those holes only as big as needed. Every extra inch of exposed soil is a place weeds can start. This is why clean installs last longer. They leave fewer weed doorways. Now comes the part many people skip, and it is why they think fabric does nothing. You cover it with mulch. Fabric alone is not the full system. Mulch is the protector. Mulch blocks extra light, keeps the fabric from breaking down in sun, and helps hold everything in place. When you leave fabric exposed, it can degrade faster, look ugly, and collect weed seeds on top. And yes, weed seeds can sprout on top of fabric if they land in dust and bits of organic matter. That is why mulch matters. A good mulch layer is thick enough that you cannot easily see the fabric. If you can see fabric everywhere through a thin sprinkle of mulch, sunlight can still reach spots, and weed seeds can still sprout in the mulch layer. With a thicker mulch layer, the surface stays darker and cooler. Weed seeds have a harder time starting, and the few that do start often have shallow roots, which means easy removal. This is the point where the method starts to feel like never weed again. Not because weeds become illegal, but because weeds become weak. The deep-rooted weeds that normally own your bed do not get the same chance. And the weeds that appear are usually shallow in the mulch, which means they pull out in seconds instead of minutes. Now I want to give you the turning point moment that makes people believe, because it is the same kind of moment that makes competitor scripts hit hard. Imagine you do this setup today. You feel like it was work, but you did it. Then 2 or 3 weeks pass. It rains. The sun comes back. This is normally when weeds explode. You walk out, expecting to see green pop up everywhere. You don't. You see mostly clean mulch. You kneel down and pull back a small patch of mulch just to check. Under it, the fabric is still flat. The soil under the fabric looks calm. No fuzzy carpet of weeds, no new jungle starting. That is when your brain goes, wait, this was the whole problem the entire time. That check is important because it teaches you what the system is doing. It is not killing weeds with poison. It is blocking the life source weeds need, which is light, and that is why it can last for months when installed well. Now let's talk about the honest part people do not say in short, viral tips. Over time, mulch breaks down. Leaves blow in. Dust settles. Tiny bits of soil build up on top of the fabric. When that top layer gets thick enough, weeds can grow in it, because weeds can grow in almost anything if they have light and a little soil, so you might still see weeds later in the season. But here is the win. Those weeds are usually not anchored deep in your bed. They are growing in the thin top layer. They pull out easily, especially after a rain, so even when weeds appear, your work is lighter. You went from deep weeding to quick tidying. This is also why the method disappeared for some people. They expected a forever fix. Then a few weeds showed up months later, and they felt tricked. The truth is simpler. It is a long-lasting reduction, not a forever freeze. If you keep your mulch layer healthy, the reduction stays strong. Now here is the second turning point, the one that makes the difference between months and 2 weeks. Edges and seams. Weeds will test edges first. They will test seams first. So when you install, you treat edges like a border you defend. Fabric should extend under mulch far enough that the edge is not exposed. Pins should keep it from curling. Overlaps should make seams a blocked zone, not a thin line. A lot of people do everything right, then they leave the edge loose. Wind lifts it. Mulch slides. Sun hits the soil through a gap. Weeds start at the gap, and then it spreads. It is not because the method is weak. It is because weeds are opportunists. They take the first doorway you leave open. Now we need to talk about the cheap fabric angle in a smart way, because cheap can mean 2 different things. Cheap can mean low cost, but correct. Or cheap can mean flimsy and frustrating. What you want is low cost and correct. One smart way to stay cheap is to cover only the spots that cause the most pain. People waste money trying to cover an entire yard. That is not needed. Pick the bed that steals your time. Pick the strip you avoid because it is annoying. Do that one first. When you feel the relief, you will know if it is worth doing more. Also, you do not always need the thickest fabric on earth. For many home beds, a decent woven fabric, pinned well, and covered with mulch can last a long time. The mulch is doing a lot of the protection work. Remember the rule: fabric blocks light. Mulch protects fabric. Now let's talk about the 2-week failure pattern, because if you avoid this, you get months. The first failure is no overlap at seams. The second failure is no pins. The third failure is giant holes around plants. The fourth failure is too thin mulch. The fifth failure is using plastic. Those 5 are the main reasons people say, "I tried this and it was terrible." Now let's talk about a place where this method feels almost too good. Garden paths. If you have a dirt path between beds, weeds love it because it gets stepped on and watered and exposed to sun. A fabric layer under wood chips turns a weedy path into a clean path. Your shoes stay cleaner. The garden looks tidier. You stop feeling like you are walking through a messy zone. And because paths do not need planting holes, you can cover them neatly with fewer weak points. Another place is the strip along a fence. That strip is often the worst because it is narrow and awkward. Nobody wants to crouch along a fence line pulling weeds. Fabric plus mulch in that strip can make it feel like the problem disappeared. It becomes a walk past it and forget it area, which is what weeding relief looks like. Now I want to address a fear that pops up in comments every time this topic comes up. Will fabric ruin my soil? The honest answer is, it depends on what you use and where. Breathable woven fabric can still allow water through, and it can still allow some air movement. In many decorative beds, it can be fine, especially when covered with mulch and used in stable spots. Problems tend to happen when people use plastic sheeting or when they install fabric in a bed that needs frequent digging and soil mixing, or when they let mulch break down into a thick soil layer on top and then never refresh anything. In that case, weeds start growing in the top layer anyway, and people blame the fabric, even though the fabric is still blocking deep weeds from the original soil. If you want to be extra kind to your soil, the best partner is still mulch. Mulch slowly breaks down and feeds the surface. It keeps moisture steadier. It supports soil life. The fabric is there to block light. The mulch is there to do the gentle soil work and protect the barrier. Now, a quick truth that makes this feel less like a fight. No method stops seeds from falling. Seeds blow in from neighbors. Birds drop seeds. Wind carries seeds. You cannot control that. What you can control is whether those seeds get easy access to your real soil and deep rooting space. Fabric under mulch makes that access much harder. So the next time someone says, "Weeds still grow on top," you can tell the real story. Yes, some weeds can grow in the mulch layer over time, but they are not the same weeds you had before. They are not anchored deep. They are not taking over your bed from below. They are usually shallow, and they usually pull out easily. That is a huge difference in real life. Now let's talk about planting in a fabric bed, because this is where many people create their own future headache. If you are using fabric in a flower bed, it is best when the plants are spaced and stable. Shrubs, perennials, decorative plantings. When you cut holes, keep them small. If you cut a huge hole because you are rushing, you will be pulling weeds in that exposed ring later. You will also see the soil ring, and it will bug you. A neat hole, a snug fit, and mulch up to the edge keeps the bed looking finished. This is one reason the method looks professional when done right. It is not just about weeds. It is about making a bed feel complete. Now, I want to give you a lazy gardener win, because that is what people truly want. The win is not perfection. The win is time. Imagine you normally spend 45 minutes every weekend weeding one bed. If fabric and mulch cut that down to 5 minutes of quick pulls, you did not just save time once, you saved it again and again. That is why the method feels like it should be common knowledge. So why don't people do this? One reason is that sprays are louder than fabric. A spray promises instant results. Fabric feels like work today. Another reason is that people got burned by the wrong barrier, usually plastic or flimsy felt, and they warned others away from the whole idea. Another reason is that some gardening advice is built for perfect worlds, where you have endless time. In real life, you want the simple fix that holds up, and there is also a quiet cultural reason. Old gardeners used whatever they had. They reused sacks, cloth, and layers under mulch. They did not call it a system, they just covered soil because they knew bare soil invites trouble. Over time, that kind of practical habit got replaced by products that promise faster fixes. Now, here is the simplest way to start without making this a big project. Choose one small area that annoys you the most. A path, a fence strip, a bed edge, or that spot under a bush that becomes a weed jungle. Clear it. Lay breathable woven fabric with overlaps, pin it, and cover it with mulch. Then, do one thing that makes the result feel real. Take a picture today. Then look again in 3 weeks. That comparison is where the relief becomes obvious. If you see a weed pop up, do not panic. Ask where it is growing. If it is growing in the mulch layer, that is normal, and it will usually pull out easily. If it is growing through a seam, you learned something. You need more overlap or one extra pin. That is an easy fix. The method is not fragile, it is just honest about weak points. And once you feel that first wave of relief, you will understand why the title says months. Because that is what it gives you when done right. Months where your bed stays neat. Months where you do not dread walking past that area. Months where the garden feels like something you enjoy again, not something that nags you. So if you want the short version that sticks in your head, here it is. Block light and do not leave doorways. Fabric blocks light. Mulch protects fabric. Overlap seams. Pin edges. Keep planting holes small. Keep mulch thick enough to hide the fabric. Do those few things and the weeding pain drops hard. If you try this, tell me the first spot you used it on. Was it a path, a fence strip, or a flower bed? And if you want more forgotten home garden fixes like this, the kind that trade one simple step for months of relief, stick around. There are plenty more that disappeared for the same quiet reasons.